GCN, or Graphics Core Next, is just about 5 years old soon, and AMD is making way for NCU, or Next Generation Compute Unit, with the Vega cards. With AMD soon moving away from the latter, I thought it'd be interesting to see how one of the first GCN cards, released in late 2012, namely the HD 7870, would stack up against today's games. GCN is a feature set designed to enable GPUs to dictate operations more independently and or take multiple instructions from the CPU at once. This method of computing is called asynchronous computing. It's a feature set that is very compliant to low-level APIs like DirectX 12 and Vulkan, which we'll see moving forward with the benchmarking results. However, not only is low-level APIs making GCN stronger, but having consoles running GCN architectures means console optimizations can often transfer well over to AMD desktop GPUs using GCN. But as we know, GCN didn't start out on consoles and was already available a year prior on the 7000 series of GPUs from AMD. This is the Pitcairn XT based Radeon HD 7870. It's one of the very first GCN cards targeted at the mid-range GPU market. The card features 2 GB of GDDR5 at 154 GB per second. It has 80 compute units, 32 render output units, and has a core clock of 1 GHz, which in turn lands the card at about 2.56 teraflops. Just in comparison, the PS4 has 1.84, which in turn means that there is an uplift of about 40% in favor of the HD 7870 when it comes to raw horsepower. I had intended on comparing the 7870 at the same teraflops directly to the PS4, but that will have to come in a later video. To benchmark, I used an i7-4790K at 4 GHz and only 4 cores active to simulate an i5. Then I had that paired with 8 gigs of DDR3 at 1600 MHz. And at the end of the video, I show Watch Dogs 2 and Doom running with a Ryzen 1800X at 4 GHz, paired with 32 gigs of DDR4 at 266 MHz. Starting with the AC4, we were able to get away with mostly high settings apart from environmental quality, which had to be set to low. It seems to be a CPU intensive setting if I remember correctly, and should be able to be cranked higher with maybe a higher clock on the 4 cores or 8 threads. Decent performance either way, with only the C combat affecting FPS mostly. Moving on to BF4, the 7870 is able to run at high settings without any issues whatsoever. The experience was very pleasant, and there is room to increase some settings here. Shadow of Mordor was a bit more tricky than the prior games, but at a mix of high, medium and low, the game ran solid, holding a 60 FPS average. Next up is GTA 5, which is a very CPU intensive game that should see performance increases with a beefier CPU. That being said, we were able to reach an average of 64 with settings mostly on high. Overwatch was tested on a bot match with teammates being real players. Having bot opponents rather than real people taxes CPU very hard, but even so, at a mix of high and medium we were able to almost hit an average of 70 FPS, with fairly tight minimums. Watch Dogs 2 is a real CPU hog, and trying to reach a solid 60 with a crippled i7 was pretty much off the table. The experience was very stuttery, and the settings had to be laughably low. Targeting a locked 30, on the other hand, meant keeping a 1080p resolution with high detail. This way of playing Watch Dogs 2 was clearly the superior one. Frame times were great, and the 30 FPS was very stable.
Oh! Hey, watch out!
Doom on the 4-core i7 was nearly unplayable using the OpenGL renderer, so I left it out altogether. Using Vulkan, however, we were able to set the resolution to 900p and have the settings mostly on low. This offered a very playable experience, with minimums only dipping to 47 for a short while. Right, so on to the Ryzen benchmarks. Using the 1800X at 4 GHz in Watch Dogs 2 gave us a very dramatic increase in FPS. Not only did the performance increase, but there was room to improve settings as well. Using the Ryzen chip, we had a minimum of almost 60 FPS. This, coupled with the fact that stutters were mostly eliminated this time around, meant that the experience was night and day. Moving to Doom, we see some strange results. This time around, with Ryzen, OpenGL played very well, almost better than Vulkan in fact. Very strange. Either there isn't any performance benefits on Vulkan with Ryzen, or we're seeing very small gains instead. So, as we can see, the 7870 shows very respectable performance even in today's games. Pairing it with a decent CPU can yield even higher performance, and shows that without a CPU bottleneck, the 7870 can still offer a great gaming experience, and should continue to deliver solid performance at least throughout the lifespan of the PS4.